Hello, Pueblo. My name is Manny Lizarriturri. I am the webmaster of the Renewable Energy Owners Coalition of America, and it is my honor to introduce to you Mayor Nick Gradisar and our president of the Renewable Energy Owners Coalition of America, my life partner, Roz de Lizarriturri. That makes me so proud. Thank you for being here. I am out of the way, and you guys take it from here.
I'm unmuted, I think. Am I unmuted? Can you all hear me?
Muted now.
Okay. Well, welcome, Mayor Gradisar. I really appreciate you doing this. I think the people of Pueblo, really need to hear the facts. And but before we go on, every time we have a meeting, my members say to me, you don't tell people why REOCA is involved in this issue. So I'm going to let everybody know, and maybe including you, sir. I know, I don't know that if you know how REOCA was born. Well, REOCA was born out of a dispute with Black Hills Energy, as a matter of fact. Manny and I had just installed solar in May of 2017. And in July of that very same year, we received a letter from Black Hills letting us know of an increase of our connect fee, 42%, and the energy we needed from the grid. They wanted to make solar net metered customers an entirely new rate class. That would have enabled them to raise our rates, you ready? From 0.0865 cents per kilowatt hour to 0.159 cents per kilowatt hour. Let's just say essentially from 9 cents to 16 cents, an 83% increase on energy solar customers needed. Now you think, well, they have solar, what do they need? Well, let me tell you, we often need energy from the grid, particularly in those cold winter months. So for many people that had solar, about 40% of us, they freaked out. This 83% was going to mean that their investment was useless. So we coalesced. We wrote letters, we gave testimony to the PUC, City Council. Manny and I even met with Governor Hickenlooper. And fortunately, REOCA met with a bunch of other nonprofits. We petitioned all these people, and the PUC voted in our favor. And the Black Hills was not allowed to make another rate class out of solar customers. However, we find out later that they continue to try. So REOCA is still monitoring that situation. Additionally, REOCA, with this 2A, we are hoping to have a real impact on the energy future of Pueblo. Rooftop solar is the way of the future, sir. And if we have our own utility, will be able to help with production of energy for the grid. We can actually give our excess energy back to the grid. So that said, now you know why REOCA is involved in this issue. Well, I am going to officially welcome you. You've had a hell of a year, sir. This is probably more than you bargained for with this COVID-19, along with everything else, but you're doing a smashing job, I must say. I have to commend you. And I'd like to, I'm gonna stop talking in a moment. I'd like to ask you, you've put a lot of political capital behind this movement, sir. I want everyone to know why you feel that 2A, passing 2A is so important for Pueblo's energy future.
Well, like you, Roz, many other consumer groups, have had issues with Black Hills Energy and have been looking at this issue for the last few years. And when I was running for mayor, and I hadn't decided whether I supported terminating the franchise with Black Hills Energy early or not. I said, let's study it and let's see. I did say even back then, though, that if we did terminate the franchise, that I thought it should be under the auspices of the independently elected water board rather than through the city council or the mayor's office, because, well, number one, I spent 14 years on the water board and I know what a professional organization that is. But 2A is really a pretty simple question. Do we want to terminate the franchise agreement with Black Hills Energy 10 years early and establish a municipal power authority under the auspices of the water board? Now, the language is complicated because it was written by lawyers, but it's a pretty simple issue. Based on the studies that I have seen and the research I've done and the experts that I've talked with, the Board of Waterworks, moving to a municipal utility is in the best long-term interest of this community because we will control our destiny. We won't be at the beck and call of this investor-owned utility or any other investor-owned utility that they might decide to sell to. We'll control our power locally. And we'll have so much more control than we have right now with this independently elected water board. Every 2 years, at least one member of the Board of Waterworks is up for election. Some years, two. Last year, 3 members of the Board of Waterworks were on the ballot for election. So a majority of the board was on the board for election. We never get to vote for the board of directors of Black Hills Energy or for the members of the Public Utility Commission. Right now, those are the people that are setting our rates, and we have no voice in that whatsoever. So I've become convinced that in the long run, a municipal-owned utility would be the best way to go for this community's future.
Well, very well put and very succinct, sir. But apparently there's a lot of folks out there that don't necessarily agree with that, as we've all been receiving almost daily brochures and literature, and even in our own media, some things that I have found to be let's call them misinformation, okay? And I'd like tonight, part of what we achieve is to clarify some of that misinformation so that the public really knows what the truth is and what they're actually voting for. I want to I have to tell you, so many people were engaged in this. I was really amazed. We got some wonderful questions, sir. I think you'll be pleased. These questions are gonna bring out some of the issues. And I'm going to start out with sort of a negative one, but I think it's really important. Our chieftain this past Sunday referred to the concern about the financial disclosure of $1,500,000 raised by Pueblo Cares as a smokescreen to deflect voters from the real issues. Why do you think this financial disclosure is so important, sir?
Well, because if you know where the money's coming from, who's funding the message, then that gives you an idea of how much of that message you should believe. Is this really an independent group, or is it Black Hills Energy in disguise? I think I know the answer to that, but they have not been willing to admit that they have put almost all of these funds in. Pueblo Cares Issue Committee filed a disclosure statement saying they got $1.5 million from Pueblo Cares, which has refused to say where they got that money. They are an issue committee. The Pueblo City Clerk has made a determination that they're an issue committee and that they're required to file disclosures. A letter was sent to them and told them what the disclosure deadlines were, and they wrote back and said, we're not going to do it. We don't think we are an issue committee. So it's important to know where the money comes from, because that helps. You know, is this a credible source or not a credible source? Obviously, Black Hills Energy has a dog in the fight. And if they wanted to spend that $1.5 million, that's fine. Just be honest and tell people. You know, don't be ashamed of it. Don't try to hide it. Just come out in the open and say, you know, yeah, this is a money machine that we have in Pueblo. We want to keep it. We're willing to put up $1.5 million to keep it, but they won't. They act like by setting up these committees, they're fooling somebody. And it's really not good for our election process. Not just for this election, but there'll be other elections. And as the city attorney says, you know, elections for city council, do we want money coming in? We don't know where it came from. That's part of what the voters are entitled to, is a full financial disclosure. Colorado law requires it. The Pueblo Municipal Code requires it, so that in every election, you're required to file financial reports saying where you got contributions of $20 or more and where you spent that money, so that voters can look at that, and that factors into their judgment about whether they should believe what they're seeing on television or what they're reading in the newspaper.
Well, I think that is an excellent reason for them to disclose where that money came from. Thank you for putting that away.
And it's legally required. It's legally required to disclose it, and they've just said, no, we're not going to do it. And that's sort of how they've acted at the Public Utilities Commission. You saw the column from Francis Concilia where they had to admonish Black Hills representatives in front of the Public Utilities Commission on 2 occasions for lying to them. So, you know, it's sort of their pattern and practice, I think, when it gets right down to it.
Well, apparently, and that's coming out very in obvious ways. Many of the ads and brochures, and we hear constantly about all the mistakes that Boulder make, and we don't want to walk down that road. Well, would you
Yeah.
let us, what have we learned from the Boulder situation, sir?
Well, we've learned quite a lot from them. Boulder's been obviously involved in this process for a long time, and they're sort of, they went first. So they've made some mistakes along the way. We've tried to learn from those mistakes. Number one, when they started out, they said the Public Utilities Commission doesn't have jurisdiction over this. And so they fought about that for 2 or 3 years and spent who knows how much money in that kind of litigation, in lawsuits. And it turns out the Public Utilities Commission does have jurisdiction over this. So that's a lesson we've learned. We go to the Public Utilities Commission first, after we identify the assets of Black Hills we want to acquire in this process, and we get a ruling from the Public Utilities Commission that we can acquire those assets. The other thing we learned from Boulder, I think, is that you don't put a dollar amount on the ballot of what you're willing to spend for attorney fees or for acquisition costs, because when you do that, that gives the investor-owned utility a target to shoot for. And as soon as they see what that number is, they will try to bog you down in litigation and lawsuits so that you hit that target. Once you hit that target, you have to go back to the voters for the authority to get more money. Now, people here say that Boulder's been a failure. The people in Boulder don't believe that. I mean, Boulder has had 5 municipal elections on whether they want to acquire the assets of Xcel Energy. So in each of those elections, the people that want to acquire the assets have prevailed. So there's some dissenters up there, including the mayor pro tem of Boulder, who wrote a letter to the citizens of Pueblo saying, oh, don't follow us. But clearly he's in the minority there. And I'm certainly hoping that that anti-municipality sentiment is in the minority in Pueblo. We certainly have it here. They're spending a lot of money, but I'm certainly hoping that they're in the minority here when it's all said and done. But the nice thing about it is that the Pueblo Cares doesn't get 1 vote on election day. Pueblo Cares Issue Committee doesn't get 1 vote on election day. Each of us has more power than them if we'll all get out and cast that vote.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's excellent. And you answered one big question people keep asking: why doesn't this ballot amendment limit the amount of money city can spend? So that is a perfect answer to that.
Well, and right now we don't know how much that's going to be. We know what the maximum amount's going to be. From the phase 2 study, the maximum amount, unless we take the generating station as well, the maximum amount will be $868 million. That's for their entire distribution system in the state of Colorado. And that includes $440 million of stranded costs if we don't take the generating system. So we're paying more for stranded costs under the phase 2 study than we are for their physical assets. So what we've done in this ballot issue 2A is we've left all the options open to the Board of Waterworks to make decisions about how much of the system to acquire, how many of the assets to acquire, so that they have all those options available to them and they will make good business decisions that are in the long-term interests of this community. We didn't want to tie their hands and say, this is the only way you can do it. We want them to do it the best way possible that makes sense for this community. And I have absolute confidence that, that they'll be able to do that.
Well, you know, that might bring me to a question I was going to ask you a little later, but since we're talking about the Board of Waterworks doing the things that they feel is necessary, they have a lot of experience running a utility. Why is it that we've had many call in about this particular issue, and one of the brochures talks about without voter approval, that the Board of Waterworks can do this, that, and the other without voter approval. Could you explain what that means, sir?
Yeah. Yeah, that language is there, and that was as a result of a compromise agreement with Pueblo Cares. They wanted that language in there, so the language was put in there, obviously, so they could talk about it during this campaign. But without voter approval is that the Board of Waterworks could issue revenue bonds without voter approval, without coming back to the voters and say, hey, can we issue these revenue bonds? Those revenue bonds are bonds that they're not general obligation bonds. They're bonds that are paid for out of the revenues that are generated by the ratepayers of the electric system. So they're allowed to issue those revenue bonds without going to a vote of the people. So they have that power now. They issued revenue bonds when we purchased the Bessemer Ditch. We issued, I don't know, $40 million worth of revenue bonds without going to a vote of the people. They have that power now. So you're not giving up anything. That's exactly the way it's been with the Board of Waterworks, and that's the way it will continue to be. But they want to try to say you're giving up your right to vote. You're not. You're not giving up any rights under the city charter. You're actually acquiring rights in this community because you are acquiring the right to vote for the people that set your rates, which you do not have. And it's sort of unheard of to set up a utility this way, but it's a plan that I think guarantees us the best possibility of success as we move forward here.
Well, I think you're right, sir. And what about all this nonsense about a blank check, that we're giving a blank check? Why is that?
Well, that's being promulgated by Black Hills and by those people that said, oh, let's put a limit. Let's put a limit on how much you can spend. That's what they say is a blank check. If there's no limit, they say it's a blank check. The only people that have a blank check here apparently is Black Hills in terms of what they're willing to spend for advertising. Started out to be $700,000, now it's $1.5 million. So we're not giving the Board of Waterworks a blank check. We're allowing them to acquire as much of the assets as they feel makes business sense to do that to operate this municipal utility. But we didn't tie their hands and say, this is all you can spend, because we don't know what the final cost will be. That final cost will be determined not by Black Hills Energy. I've heard $1 billion bandied about, and there's nowhere in the phase 2 study or in the study that Black Hills did is $1 billion even mentioned. I mean, they're putting that number in there because they're trying to scare people into thinking, oh, that's something we can't afford. But the fact of the matter is, with the current rates that are being charged by Black Hills, we can retire $1 billion worth of revenue bonds in 20 years without raising our rates a dime. So that's, and if you look at the Pueblo Water Board's resolution, when they adopted this resolution unanimously to support two-way and to agree to undertake this project, their resolution sets forth with specificity the financial calculations that they made to say, hey, this is feasible. The phase 2 study said it was feasible. So if you go to pueblowater.org, you can read their resolution and their frequently asked questions there, and you'll see that this is financially doable for us. Even if it was $1 billion, there's enough excess capacity in the rates to retire that debt in 20 years.
It's amazing. Well, who will determine the cost, sir? That's a good point.
Well, yeah, if we can't reach an agreement with Black Hills Energy about the costs, and they've said they're not a willing seller, okay. So this is not a government takeover. What this is we're exercising our option to purchase their assets under the terms of the franchise agreement, the Constitution, and the statutes of the state of Colorado. So if we can't reach an agreement with them in terms of what the value is, we'll have the property appraised, they'll have the property appraised, and we'll bring an action in court, a condemnation action, and a judge in Pueblo or a jury in Pueblo will determine what the purchase price will be based on the reports they get from the appraisers. And why this is a conservative approach that we've taken and why $868 million is the top amount is because that's the highest value that the phase 2 study said we would have to pay. That's, if we had to replace their system new today, less depreciation, that's what it would be. Other methods that appraisers use is, okay, what did Black Hills pay for the system? What did they pay for it? And subtract the depreciation. That's a much lower value. The phase 2 study said the value we pay will probably be between $868 million and that value of what Black Hills actually paid for the property. So we used the highest possible value in the phase 2 study and in making a determination that this was financially feasible before deciding to proceed. So,
well, you brought up the franchise agreement. I'm glad you did, because I know in that we're taking our 10-year option to leave the franchise, correct? In August 2020.
Ending at 10 years early.
Exactly. But that's in the franchise agreement. Black Hills,
yes.
Correct?
And it's in the Colorado statutes. It's
Perfect.
In the Colorado statutes that we're allowed to do that, to terminate the franchise agreement at the 10th and the 15th anniversary of the franchise agreement.
Okay, so I've seen in the paper quite a few letters to the editors saying, well, why don't we just wait another 10 years and then this process is going to take a while. Why not just wait till it's over and then let the market decide what to do?
Yeah, well, and for the first year of my administration, I spent negotiating with Black Hills. And one of the things I put on the table and offered to them was, well, why don't we enter into an agreement that at the end of the franchise, you'll sell us your assets, either for a price we agree upon today, or for we'll figure out a formula. We'll figure out a method to set the price, and at the end of the franchise, you'll sell us your assets. And they said, no, we're not for sale. So what that means basically is if we stop this process today and waited till the end of the franchise, we'd have to start this process all over again because they're not going to willingly sell us their assets. We'd have to go through the same process and take their assets from them in a condemnation action that will happen if the 2A is passed by the voters today. So the result of waiting 10 years would just be paying 10 years more of those high rates, and we'd have to go through the same process at the end of the franchise agreement. So that's why it doesn't make any sense. I told Black Hills, if you'll agree to sell us your assets at the end of the franchise agreement, I'll pull the plug on this, and we won't have this off-ramp election. We'll just wait until the franchise is over. They wouldn't agree to do that. So that's why we're at where we're at today.
Well, that is news to me. I was not aware of that, sir. I am really glad that someone asked that because that's a very interesting piece of news because,
Yeah.
people ask, and thank you for that. Well, there were a lot of great op-eds in the last week, and so it gave people lots of good questions to bring forward. And one of them, this past weekend, someone accused the city of not doing its due diligence on this issue, which blew my mind. But could you briefly outline, sir, the process the Electric Utility Commission went through and what the conclusions that were reached were, please?
Yeah, after groups came to the city council set up, and this is 2.5 or 3 years ago in 2017, I believe, set up the Electric Utilities Commission, and the Electric Utilities Commission said, okay, how do we get the information we need? They sent out requests for proposals and got replies from experts from around the country and selected a firm, I think they're out of California, maybe it's Oregon, EES, and who did the phase 1 study. And it was sort of an 30,000 foot view of the Black Hills system. And they said, it looks to us like it's feasible, but we suggest you do a phase 2 study, more in depth, more in detail. And the city council decided to do that last year. So last summer, we retained them to do that. And in October, they came back with a phase 2 report, where they analyzed the assets of Black Hills Energy and put some values on what the system was worth, and said, if you want to do it, municipalization is feasible, and this is how it's feasible, this is why it's feasible, why it makes sense to have a public utility operate the system rather than an investor-owned utility, and how it made financial sense for us to do that. So that's how we got to where we're at now. They gave us the results of that phase 2 study, and city council agreed to put the franchise election on the ballot, unanimously agreed to put the franchise agreement on the ballot for May the 5th. Under the franchise agreement and under the law, we have to have a decision made by August the 10th of 2020. That's the 10th year anniversary. So we have to decide before then how we wish to proceed. If we want to terminate the franchise, we have to do it by then.
Right, exactly. Well,
So that's why we're having the election on May the 5th.
Gotcha.
And the voters will decide if they want to terminate it early. If they want to terminate the franchise 10 years early, I believe that we've put together a plan that will allow that to move forward successfully. It's not the kind of thing where we just ask them, we want to terminate the franchise agreement 10 years early, and then we'll decide what we're going to do. I didn't think that was a good way to submit it to the voters. I didn't think that was fair to them. I thought we should put a plan together that says, okay, if we terminate the franchise 10 years early, this is how we're going to move forward. Leaving, as I said at the beginning, as many options available to the Board of Waterworks as possible so that they could develop a system that makes the most economic sense and business sense for this community. And I think they've done that. Obviously, there's a lot more work to do. If the voters want to terminate the franchise, that's not the end of the process. that's the beginning of the process. But the Board of Waterworks has laid out a plan. They've retained the experts and have already formulated some ideas about how this will work to the benefit of this community to get us even lower power rates than what Black Hills got in their response to their 200 megawatt to renewable energy proposal.
Well, you know, you bring up something interesting here with municipalization. Well, one of the things I find really remarkable is through all this, that comment about that someone made about not doing due diligence. What I can't understand is since in September 2017, the City Council unanimously formed this Electric Utility Commission to study leaving the franchise. They were willing to look at it. The EUC came back in August of 2018 with a recommendation to use EES. As you said, they got RFPs returned from 7 consulting firms, sir, 7. And out of those 7, they chose EES, which has been in business for years. The president has 35 years of experience in energy field. Then the recommendation from EES, which was also a unanimous decision to move forward with the studies by the City Council, voted unanimously to move forward. EES came back and said, yes, municipalization is a good way for Pueblo to go. In the long term, you'll save 10, 12, 15%. Why now is City Council deciding not to take the recommendations of a company that they spent time and money looking at their conclusions, and yet they're ignoring them? I'm not sure there's an answer to that question, sir, but
well, I think some of the members of the City Council have bought into the Black Hills propaganda. I mean, Black Hills is trying to scare everybody, including the members of the City Council, that this is a risky proposition. It's not a risky proposition. What I tell people is it's riskier for you to go to Walmart to buy groceries in this day and age than it is to vote for 2A. That you're taking more of a chance by going to buy your groceries with the coronavirus out there than you are in voting for 2A. So, and I think there's some maybe some sentiment on the City Council that the plan that was developed, they don't control the plan. You know, they don't control the electric utility. So I think there's some sentiment there that, you know, that City Council wanted to control it. I felt from the time we started discussing it that was not a good way to go. I've seen how the City Councils in the past have operated. I've seen how the Board of Waterworks have operated in the past. And there was just no doubt in my mind that if we're going to go this route, if the voters wanted to terminate the franchise agreement early, that it should be under the authority of the Board of Waterworks, because they'll make professional business-like decisions separated from politics. They won't get into these political fights, you know, where you've got 3 failed candidates for mayor on the City Council that decide, you know, municipalization is not a good idea. So, you know, Black Hills has obviously started a charm offensive with the community, and I think some of the members of City Council have bought into that. But so I don't know exactly why they've changed their mind. There's different members on council now than there were before. A couple of them are different, so that might be part of the reason. But
and I'm wondering if one of the president of City Council, as a matter of fact, is very fond of repeating something that was said by Gary Saliba, who is the president of this consulting firm. When asked if municipalization is so great and all these cities you have found would do well with municipalization, why do so few cities go forward with this? And Gary Saliba's answer is political will. Would you explain to the viewers what that means, sir? I'm not sure everyone knows what that means.
Yeah, well, to me, it means that I think politicians lose their nerve. I mean, they don't want to take a chance. You know, I think that's what political will is. Do you have the will to see this through? You know, and I think it's a shame that there are some in this community that don't have the will to see it through, because as I said, I believe it's going to be in the long-term best interests of our community. You know, the city of Pueblo was founded by immigrants who came to this country and built. City of Pueblo was built by immigrants who came here to make steel, to build the American West. They came with, you know, oftentimes nothing but the clothes on their back. And they had a spirit that they could do anything they set their mind to. I think the people in this community still have that spirit. Unfortunately, some members of city council don't. They think this is too difficult, that it's too technical, that we can't get it done. You know, we can get it done. If we set our mind to it, we can get it done. We will get it done. So I think that's what Mr. Salib was talking about when he said they lose their political will. Not that it turns out to be a bad idea, simply they don't want to do the work. It's hard work, and it will be hard work, and it'll take time, and it'll take money. But if we persist, the outcome will be, at the end of this endeavor, we will own the assets of Black Hills Energy. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that at all, if we just persist and move forward.
And I really like what Mr. Autoby said recently in an op-ed, that isn't it better to own than to rent? And I
Well, exactly. Exactly. When you're renting, the rent just keeps going up. You never own it. And, you know, we paid for it, obviously. The ads that Black Hills is running, or that Pueblo Cares Issue Committee is running, says we paid for it twice. We're going to pay for it again. And, you know, we paid for it 4 or 5 times over the last 40 years. We're going to continue to pay for it over and over, but we're not going to own it. We pay for it, they own it. What kind of sense does that make? It's sort of like living in a house for 60 years and just paying the landlord rent when you could buy it yourself for the same amount you're paying the landlord rent. Does that make any sense? It doesn't. But, you know, that's apparently an argument that appeals to some people. So that's what they're making, that, you know, we're going to pay for it again. Well, we're still paying for it, and our rates aren't going to go down just because we've already paid for it. If we've already paid for it, how come our rates haven't gone down?
Very good point, sir. Well, it brings me to, though, a lot of people say, what are we, you know, Black Hills pays a lot into the community with property taxes, sales tax, franchise fees. What do you say about the loss of revenue from Black Hills?
Well, there's not going to be any loss of revenue. If you look at the Board of Waterworks resolution, and when they analyze it, they have calculated into the operating expenses, not taxes, but payment in lieu of taxes, which is what governments do, these kind of organizations do. They pay to the government payments in lieu of taxes to make them whole. So that's what would happen. And the Board of Waterworks has taken those payments into consideration in analyzing the finances and whether or not this is a feasible financial deal. And they've concluded that even if we make payments to the governments to make them whole, that it still makes sense financially to do that. So the governments, the city of Pueblo, Pueblo County, and the city's not going to lose its franchise fee. There would be, it might not be called a franchise fee, but it would be a payment in lieu of a franchise fee or something of that nature, so that all the governments, the Board of Waterworks said, would be made whole. There's not going to be any loss in taxes or loss in revenues to any of the governmental entities under the proposal that the Board of Waterworks has put together.
Excellent.
So it's just not true that there's going to be a loss in revenue for the governments.
Well, I said tonight's going to be about clarification and clearing up some misconceptions, including, will you please answer once and for all, is this utility going to be run by the city?
It's not going to be run by the city. It's not going to be run by the city, and that's to the chagrin, I think, of some members of the city council, who, if we're going to do it, they'd like the city to run it because then they'd have control over it. And I heard in some of the discussions, you know, well, we won't have any control over it. No, you won't. The voters will have control over it. The voters who elect the Board of Waterworks will have control over it. Now, certainly the Board of Waterworks is going to listen to the mayor. The Board of Waterworks is going to listen to the city council, but it's not going to be swayed by that, those emotional decisions that are sometimes made by members of the city council to do something, whether it makes sense or not, just because that's how the emotions are at that time. The Board of Waterworks will take a much more educated and rational approach, I think, to operating this and making those decisions. And they'll be able to make those decisions quickly, which is what I think is one of the big things about here is this local control. Right now, there's a sentiment out there, I think, it's a false sentiment, that the Public Utilities Commission is sort of protecting us from Black Hills Energy. They haven't protected us. The Public Utilities Commission has saddled us with the highest electric rates on the Front Range. Now, obviously, in the last few years, we've had a commissioner on there from Pueblo who took a little different look at things, but she's gone now. So don't think that the Public Utilities Commission is going to protect us. we're the only ones who are going to protect ourselves. And the way we do that is by taking this off ramp, voting for 2A, and paying attention to who we elect to the Board of Waterworks, who's going to operate the utility. Because it's that local control that will make all the difference in the world here. Right now, before Black Hills can put in a telephone pole, basically, they've got to go to the Public Utilities Commission and get permission. And that's a bureaucratic process. As an example, their renewable energy project that they want to do, they decided I think last November that was a good idea after seeing the results of our phase 2 study and finding out what kind of proposals we got for renewable energy in that phase 2 study. They said, oh boy, I can't believe this. And Public Service did the same thing. They went out to build a solar field for the Everaz Steel, and they got the same kind of results that we got. And so Black Hill says, well, let's get on this bandwagon. So they decided, then they filed with the Public Utilities Commission in December for permission to, build this 200 megawatt renewable energy facility. And they've got so few friends on the Public Utilities Commission, and there's so little trust of them up there, that the Public Utilities Commission is not even going to have a hearing on their request for this until August. So that's 10 months later. And that's how it works. We lost a company last year because of the 120 days it took for Black Hills to get through an economic development rate for that company through the Public Utilities Commission. With the local Board of Waterworks, they're right here. They can make decisions in 30 days or less about an economic development rate for a company. They don't have to go through that regulatory process that Black Hills is stuck with, as long as they're an investor-owned utility and have to go through the Public Utilities Commission. So those are all the advantages to this 2A proposal, is that we'll have local control, decisions can be made quickly in the best interest of this community. So companies aren't going to wait around for 8 or 10 months while the Public Utilities Commission decides whether or not you get an economic development rate for your business. So I just think that's one of the most attractive aspects of this 2A proposal, is that local decision making on a quick basis when it needs to be quick.
This is great, sir, because I realize local control, we want to say and what happens, but I didn't realize about the time frame. We could definitely lose businesses that are eager to invest in a 120-day time frame. That's ridiculous. So
right. Well, yeah, we have. I mean, that just flat out happened. We don't have to speculate about that. That's happened. And with our high energy rates, I believe that we've lost a lot of businesses that wanted to come to Pueblo, just because if you're use a lot of electricity, you can't financially afford to come here. It doesn't make economic business sense to come here, because you can get rates that are 49% lower in Colorado Springs or 40% lower in the Denver metropolitan area. So what kind of business sense does that make? Those are the kind of issues, I think, that we'll be able to rectify if 2A passes and we establish a municipal utility. We'll get our rates for that much more in line with what our competitors are charging, because we don't compete with, the service territory that's serviced by San Isabel or any of those. We compete with the Front Range. And when you look at it, we have by far the highest electric rates on the Front Range. And that's what has hurt us in terms of economic development.
Oh, I know, where we buy our hamburgers. A Bingo Burger, he pays 15 cents a kilowatt hour here and 10.5 cents in Colorado Springs. So it costs him more to make a burger here than there. It makes no sense. So
yeah, right.
A lot of people have asked this, though. They know the Board of Waterworks knows water. They know that. But what experience do they have running an electric utility?
Well, they don't have any experience running an electric utility, but they're a utility company. There are utility companies, so they have experience in terms of long-range planning, in terms of how you bring big projects to fruition. So they'll be able to hire the experts who know how to run the electric system. Those people are around. You bring in that kind of talent. You don't have to have that kind of talent when you start. Shoot, if it was me, I like the people from Black Hills Energy here. I'd probably offer them jobs. Say, hey, you want to come to work for this municipal utility because you know the system. And I think the employees would. And I think the Board of Waterworks will bring in those people who know that system, who want to stay here. But to say that the Board of Waterworks doesn't have any knowledge of electricity, that's true. But that's knowledge that you can acquire very easily on the open market. Other communities do it all the time. Colorado Springs has, a combined one utility company with water and electricity. So this is not new ground we're plowing. It's new for Pueblo, but other communities do it all the time. And that expertise is out there to operate the electric system. Most of it is with Black Hills and would come over, I think, to the city, to the municipal utility operated by the Board of Waterworks if that comes to pass. So
that would be the employees, but what about who would do the everyday operation and maintenance? Who would be in charge of that?
Well, what they've said, the Board of Waterworks has said they're going to contract with somebody who's experienced in operating a distribution system to start out. So they'll put out a request for proposals, and we'll find an operator who is experienced in operating a distribution system. And one of the things they've talked about is, a regional distribution system. So if any other communities want to come in on this deal, that they'll be able to take advantage of that as well. A regional distribution system, a regional power authority, so that we can sort of combine our purchasing power for power and have a much bigger load that will get us the best deals out there in terms of energy costs. So those are all the kind of things that the Board of Waterworks is exploring. But it's true they don't know how to run an electric company now.
But they're smart enough to know how to find out. That's
exactly.
That's what I like about them. And you know what? I'll tell you, this conversation is great because you're answering all the questions I have. The one about a water and power authority, that for me is so visionary. And that's how Canyon City and all our surrounding cities that are Black Hills customers can join along, right?
Yeah, and that's a decision they'll have to make. And, each of them may have franchise agreements with Black Hills Energy that expire at different times. Okay. So if an agreement can't be made with Black Hills to purchase all of those assets, they'll have to wait, or they'll have to exercise their off-ramp provisions, I believe. Canyon City has negotiated a new franchise agreement with Canyon City, but they haven't submitted it to the voters yet because they want to see what Pueblo does. And I would think that if Pueblo decides that we're going to set this municipal utility up, that Canyon City would be anxious to join us, because none of those communities like paying these excessive rates any better than we do. They haven't been treated any better than we do. So I think if Pueblo takes the lead, that you'll be surprised at how much cooperation there is from these other communities. And the Board of Waterworks is used to that, because in the water business, you have to have that regional cooperation. So they already have relationships with some of these other communities because they work together on big, complicated water projects. So they're just a step forward, and I think these other communities will join us in this effort if the voters of Pueblo decide they want to terminate the franchise agreement early.
Well, that's good to hear, because I know there's concern about the other communities, and there's a concern here too. We've had questions, believe it or not, that people are worried if we do decide to leave the franchise, what will Black Hills do? It's not going to happen overnight. Are they going to continue supplying us with electricity?
Yeah, they're required by the Public Utilities Commission and by the franchise agreement to continue supplying electricity and maintaining the system until we notify them that we're ready to throw the switch, or we have another provider there. So they're required to do that.
Okay, well that's good to hear, because a lot of people are concerned. Why would they want to keep giving us power if we're kicking them out? But obviously,
well, they're not giving us power. We're paying for power. But they will have to continue to supply it until we notify them that we have another source and that we're ready to move. So they can't just walk away and say, okay, we're done.
You mentioned that the Board of Waterworks doesn't answer to the PUC, but where would the accountability be if we're not protected? As we know, we haven't been protected by the PUC.
Yeah. So if, for instance, the Board of Waterworks decided we're only going to do Pueblo County, the entirety of Pueblo County, even outside the city limits, then the PUC would be involved in the regulation there to make sure that the people outside the city limits who don't get to vote for the members of the Board of Waterworks, but the PUC would regulate the rates that those people are charged, make sure that they're being treated fairly vis-a-vis the city residents. We couldn't charge them twice as much probably and get away with it with the PUC. But where the regulation is going to come from and where the accountability is going to be is from the voters. You know, the voters are the ones that elect the Board of Waterworks. And as I said earlier, every 2 years, at least one member of the Board of Waterworks is up for election. So if the community is not happy with the direction the Board of Waterworks is going on the electric utility or the rates that are being charged, they can change those members and make a change, which is something they cannot do now. They cannot do now. So we're going to have a lot more control over and much more accountability over our electric system with the elected Board of Waterworks than we do now.
Well, that's good to hear. What happens if over time, because we know this isn't going to happen overnight, what happens in 3 to 5 years if we find out this is way more than we thought it was going to be or not as good as we thought it was going to be? What would happen then?
Well, the Board of Waterworks simply wouldn't do it. I mean, they wouldn't acquire the assets. They wouldn't proceed forward. I mean, if it turns out to not make financial sense, they wouldn't have to do it. I mean, we'd continue to get energy from Black Hills just like we're getting it, continue to pay those high prices. So if it turns out for some reason, I can't imagine a set of circumstances where it wouldn't be financially feasible to go in that direction. But if there were a set of circumstances that arose, the Board of Waterworks can say, okay, we're not going to do this right now. We're going to wait. We're just going to stop. They could do that easily if they decide they want to do that. So, as I say, we're leaving as much discretion to the Board of Waterworks as we can to make decisions that are in the best financial interests of this community in the long run. And that's what they do. They make decisions for the long run.
So it sounds to me this is almost no risk. If it's not going well and we want to bail out, we don't have to move forward. So
Right.
What's the problem? Why don't we do this?
Well, that's a good question. And I'm encouraging everybody to do it because you're right, Roz, there's not any risk to this. This is not a risky proposition. As I said earlier, it's much more risky to go to Walmart to get groceries than it is to vote for 2A because it's...
It seems like a no-brainer. I have a question for you. Coming from the renewable energy world, who's going to be the new energy provider in all this? Who's going to supply our energy?
Well, that's a good question. And it sort of depends on what the final outcome is. I mean, for instance, if we decide we don't want to pay that $440 million for the stranded cost for the Pueblo Airport generating station, so let's put in another $200 million and we'll just buy the generating station. And we could buy it, we could generate our own power there. What power we didn't need here, we could sell to Colorado Springs or somebody else or put it out on the market. But likely what will happen is that there will be a request for proposal sent out for energy. The phase 2 study and the quotes we got was for a 70% renewable energy portfolio. And the amount we were paying for that energy was considerably less than what we're paying now for the Pueblo Airport generating station. So the Board of Waterworks or this regional power authority, if that's what comes to be, will acquire the energy necessary to supply the customers. And they'll get it from what sources they want, probably based on what the citizens of Pueblo have said, that they're interested in being 100% renewable by 2035, that they'll be looking at renewable energy resources for that. So probably contracting with renewable energy companies that have wind farms or solar energy fields. It doesn't make much sense for the government to own those solar energy fields or those wind farms because they don't get any of the tax credits there. We don't pay taxes. The government doesn't pay taxes. So what makes those financially feasible now is you have private investors that do that, and they're able to take advantage of those credits. It reduces the cost that they charge for electricity. And plus, they can lock the cost of electricity in for a long period of time. When you buy renewable energy, you can lock the price in for 20 or 30 years because they're not depending upon the price of natural gas or oil or coal or anything. Once you have those renewable energy fields in, the maintenance costs on them are a lot less than operating a power plant, coal-fired or gas-fired. So the Board of Waterworks will get the energy based on proposals that it submits.
And who will help decide what the renewable energy mix will be? Will the citizens have any say in that?
Oh, I would think so, yeah. I mean, the citizens will be, as I say, the Board of Waterworks is elected by the voters. And so the citizens will weigh in with the Board of Waterworks saying, hey, we think we ought to have that 90% or 95% renewable portfolio sooner rather than later. And, you know, the Board of Waterworks is going to be responsive, especially if it means that we're going to pay less for energy than we're paying now. Now, you have to have that firm energy supply as well. So you've got to have, until we get battery storage technology to the point where we can store that energy that, so when the sun doesn't shine, we can draw it out. But you have to have a firm power supply at this point, at least. But who knows what that'll be like in 8 or 10 years. So
exactly. And it does sound like if we go forward with 2A, if we leave the franchise, we would be able to reach our goals of renewable energy for all by 2035 sooner.
Nope.
Even, right?
Yeah, no reason why we wouldn't. No reason why we wouldn't. Yes.
That is music.
Yeah, it might be much sooner. It might be much sooner if we don't take the airport generating station, which is natural gas fired, and we don't buy power from them. We could conceivably be there in, 4 or 5 years.
Okay, we don't want to. We'll go with what the market goes.
Yes. Yes.
I'm looking at my questions here because we've really done so many of them just in having a conversation, sir. Okay, you did allude to the fact that the high energy is probably keeping a lot of businesses from moving here. So you're really optimistic about economic growth once this happens.
Economic growth, yes. I think that we're going to have a much better opportunity for that when we have a public power supply, because we'll be able to make decisions on special rates for those customers on a very time-friendly basis. We won't have to go through that cumbersome Public Utilities Commission process that drags it out and requires that uncertainty there. So I know I've heard arguments out there that if this happens, if 2A passes, this uncertainty of taking over the system companies don't want uncertainty. Companies don't mind uncertainty. What they don't want is high energy costs.
Exactly.
That's what they don't want. So if the uncertainty is caused by us getting some lower energy costs for them, they're going to look forward to that.
Let's see here. I think we're pretty much, let's see here. Oh, we do know it's not going to happen overnight. And someone wants to know, what are the next steps to making, once this passes, once 2A passes on May 5th, where do we go from here? And if you can give us an idea of the timeline.
Yeah, well, the Board of Waterworks has said they think it'll take 5 to 8 years. The first couple of years will be in terms of study and identifying assets, and frankly, trying to make a deal with Black Hills to say, okay, the voters of Pueblo don't want you anymore. Let's make a deal. Let's get this process done. Sell us your assets. If they won't do that, then the Board of Waterworks will go through that 3-step process of going to the Public Utilities Commission and saying, these are the assets we want to acquire. We'll get approval from the Public Utilities Commission to do that. We'll come back. We'll have our appraisal. The Black Hills will have their appraisal. We'll go to court and have a condemnation action. And the judge or the jury in Pueblo will decide what the value is. And then once that's done, we'll go back to the Public Utilities Commission and says, okay, this is what we're going to have to pay. These are the assets we're going to take. And the Public Utilities Commission puts their stamp of approval on it, and it's done at that point. And that's when we would have the municipal power supplier at that point. So it's a 3-phase process, but they're not, those are not insurmountable problems. We know what it is, thanks to Boulder, how we have to do it. The Board of Waterworks has hired the experts and are prepared to do it if that's what the voters decide they want to do.
Well, there's quite a few other cities in this state alone that have done it successfully. So I say, Pueblo has been a leader in so many ways. It would be wonderful for us to take the lead in this as well, sir. So
well, 75% of the public power of the geographical area of Colorado is provided by public power. So it's not like this is something new or anything. There's only 2 investor-owned utilities in Colorado, Black Hills and XL. So This is not something we're creating from scratch. I think there's some innovative ideas that the Board of Waterworks has in terms of the regional power distribution and the regional power authority and the regional distribution authority that make this even more exciting because we can put all these communities together and, as I said, strengthen our buying power so that we're going to be a big energy consumer and people will want to do business with us for that reason.
Well, I have to say, sir, I think you are a visionary, and I am so grateful that you have this vision for Pueblo. Let me ask you, is there anything that we've covered a lot of ground tonight? Are there any things that we haven't covered that you want to make sure the people of Pueblo know before they vote, before they put their ballots in?
Well, people want to know, well, why is this a better deal? How can this be better? How will it lower costs? And it's going to lower costs because a public power authority like the Board of Waterworks is not going to have some of the expenses that an investor-owned utility has. So it won't have to worry about satisfying shareholders with profits. It won't have to pay state or federal income tax. It will be able to borrow money at a lower interest rate than Black Hills does. People don't know it, but we're paying $350 million worth of debt right now in our bills that Black Hills Energy has. They've assigned to us, and that's part of what we're paying for today. So that's how the rates will be lowered. We'll have a lower interest rate. We won't have to pay some of the state and federal income taxes that Black Hills Energy has to pay. And we won't have to pay, multi-million-dollar salaries that we're being charged a portion from that are in Rapid City in that headquarters there. So, and as I said earlier, this can all be done with revenue bonds that can be retired based on the current rates. And if we pay less for the system than we've anticipated in phase 2, we might get rate cuts pretty quickly because if there's excess revenue there, excuse me, that's where the rate cuts would come in if we don't have to pay as much as what that highest value. That,
we don't have to worry about our taxes going up or our electric bills or the water bills going up to pay for this. We don't have to worry.
We don't. Now, there's some language in there that people are arguing, yeah, they're going to use the water revenue. They're not. What they're going to do, and this will help us in the municipal finance market, is that they'll be able to use the water revenue along with the electric revenue sort of as a guarantee. But all the revenue bonds will be paid out of the electric bill, but the water revenue will be there as a backup, and that'll give us a lower interest rate because it looks like there's a lot more money there to borrow that, and that's going to make lenders more secure. And so they're going to give us a lower interest rate than they would if we're just using electric rates alone. That's why that was there, so that those revenues can be pledged even though they're not used to pay for it. They're there as security for a lender if it went bad, which it won't. But so it's sort of the intricacies of municipal finance that you have to put on the ballot so that you keep those options open. As I say, we don't want to say it's just electric revenues you can use because you're going to pay a higher interest rate if it's only electric revenues versus if you have water revenues available, even if you never have to use them, but if you pledge them as security, so the lender feels more secure, you're going to get a lower interest rate. So all those things have been taken into consideration in putting this plan together. And that's why I think it's a good plan, why I think it's a plan that'll work for the city of Pueblo if the voters want to terminate the franchise and establish this public power entity.
Okay, and we don't have to worry about our taxes going up though, right?
No, we don't have to worry about the taxes going up at all. As I said earlier, there's no taxpayer money that's going to be used to pay for these assets because the Board of Waterworks is legally not allowed to tax. That's why they're not governed by Tabor, because Tabor is the taxpayer's Bill of Rights. They don't levy taxes, so they're not governed by Tabor. So you're not giving up any Tabor rights. You don't have any Tabor rights with the Board of Waterworks because they don't levy taxes. So this that these lies that are there, that your taxes are going to go up, that the taxpayers are going to pay for this system, all false. The taxpayers aren't going to pay for it. Pueblo and the Board of Waterworks is even, they're going to undertake all the risk. So it's not going to cost the city of Pueblo anything more to proceed with this. Our credit's not going to be used or jeopardized at all. The Board of Waterworks has $1 billion worth of assets in their water rights and in their portfolio. So it's a big, strong company that is able to do this in a calculated, reasonable, rational manner, and they'll get it done, just like they did in the acquisition of the Bessemer Ditch. When I was on the Board of Waterworks, we spent $70 million of this community's money acquiring that. And as a result of that, we have the best municipal water supply in the state of Colorado. What we don't have is an electric rate that will help us bring customers in to use that water. And
Exactly.
this, I think, will sort of take care of that problem for us in terms of leveling out these rates and making it more attractive to businesses and consumers that want to live in Pueblo.
Well, I have to tell you, sir, I hope everyone else enjoyed this, because I enjoyed learning a lot more about this than I knew. And I really feel that you have helped clarify some of these misconceptions out there. And there's going to be another opportunity to clarify misconceptions on Friday night. There's a wonderful series that's been happening from Bring Power Home called Speaking Truth About Power. And we're going to have on Friday night, Frances Concilia is going to be the star, and there'll be some other business leaders, and she will illuminate us on probably a lot of things that were happening at the PUC that we didn't know about. So that'll be at 7 o'clock, Facebook Live on Bring Power Home 2020. And
I'll be watching.
Me too. And I can't thank you enough for doing this, sir.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Really.
My only regret in this campaign is that we haven't gotten Black Hills to engage, and to have these community forums, have this community discussion so that we could talk about these issues with them. They just have refused to do that. Instead, they're just relying on the television ads that are made in Washington, D.C. by, Washington, D.C. politicians. And so they want to try to bring that kind of campaigning to Pueblo. I really believe that the people here expect more from our campaigns and deserve more for sure, and that they'll take that into account on Election Day.
I think so too. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure. Thanks, Roz.
Okay, thank you.